We have some big news to go over today. Elliotte Friedman has just dropped a massive Leafs trade report surrounding one particular player and one particular team that not only has fans fired up, but changes the outlook of the Leafs going forward as we inch closer and closer to training camp. We're going to break down exactly what that report is and discuss, of course, the implications that this has on the Leafs as Brad Treliving continues to prepare for something big, specifically regarding a trade into the top six. We're going to break that down as well as a few other updates. But before we get into it all, if you're a part of the 71% who aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You guys have been absolutely fantastic with the support. There's a lot to go over today, and obviously we're going to be talking about a new report from Elliotte Friedman. He's arose from from sleeping. He hasn't talked in a while, hasn't dropped many reports. He dropped a lot now, and there's a lot to go over today. We're going to be discussing Nick Robertson, but not only Nick Robertson, the Pittsburgh Penguins and Kyle Dubas. As Elliotte Friedman on his recent, I believe it was 32 Thoughts podcast, but he came out and revealed that he's had a couple of people ask him about the possibility of Nick Robertson getting traded to Pittsburgh because Kyle Dubas obviously knows him. If you listen to it, he basically hints at the fact that we know Dubas is interested in a lot of the Leafs players, even guys like Dennis Hildeby we've heard about in the past. But now with Nick Robertson, this one becomes extremely interesting because they just signed him to that one-year deal, agreed to an arbitration number. That doesn't mean they can't trade him. It actually might make a trade more likely now that they've figured it out. And the Pittsburgh Penguins and Kyle Dubas, and regarding potentially Brian Russ, we'll dive into later in the video, things are starting to pick up here. And I think when these reports start to come out, and there's some other ones we'll have in the videos in the coming days, things are starting to pick up here. And I think something big is brewing specifically for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Well, like we said in our video when Nick Robertson signed, yes, he's signed now and he's a player for the Toronto Maple Leafs and he's signed to a contract for next season. But I think it actually makes it maybe not necessarily more likely that he gets traded, but easier to trade him now that he has a contract and whoever's acquiring him knows how much he's going to make going into next season. And I think it's actually fair value for the fact that the salary cap is going up and, his point production for how little he plays. But when I heard this from Elliotte Friedman and looking at the Pittsburgh Penguins and what they have, I think this makes all the sense in the world for both teams. Now, does Kyle Dubas want to trade with this team? I don't know if he's going to be as petty as the guys over in Calgary with Brad Treliving, but I think that there could be some interest, that's for sure. But he's definitely going to want something very sweet from the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's going to want a sweetener in there. So I don't think it's definitely not going to be a 1-for-1 or anything like that. But the Pittsburgh Penguins have something that I think the Toronto Maple Leafs want. I think it's affordable. And if it's Nick Robertson going the way, I think it makes sense for the Leafs because they have to move out some bodies. I could see them wanting to hang on to Nick Robertson as well, but where does he fit in right now? I just don't see the vision. Necessarily. Again, I could see them hanging on to him, but it's if you want to add to the top line wing, you got to move out some salary, right? So you got to find that somewhere. And in terms of Pittsburgh, they have a player in Brian Rust or even Rickard Rakell that make $5 and $5.1 million respectfully, that I think makes a lot of sense for the Toronto Maple Leafs. If you add one of those guys to the top line, notably Brian Rust, I think that could make a lot of sense. So very interesting there. Again, I'm just throwing that out there. Friedman was just saying it could make some sense. Kyle Dubas knows Nick Robertson, was a fan of Nick Robertson. And if you're thinking about it from both sides, again, it would have to be a bigger trade. But if you're getting Brian Rust, if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, there's your top line winger, very affordable top line winger. You're getting him with term. And for the Pittsburgh Penguins, if you were to put Nick Robertson with Sidney Crosby, you cannot tell me that Nick Robertson wouldn't score 30 to 35 goals. So I think it makes sense for both teams. Pittsburgh can do whatever they want because they have a ton of salary cap space. So I think this makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure that, now that things have settled down in terms of arbitration, I think, a lot of teams are going to start kicking tires again on some trades.
Yeah, let's dive into the full report even more. It basically goes on to say that they got arbitration settled on Saturday, $1.825 million. The Maple Leafs have to clear some bodies there. They've got a lot of them. I heard one Columbus fan ask me if Chinakhov or Robertson made some sense, but he also says nobody expects them not to do things before puck drop. That's for sure. And obviously that's going to be a big part of this is the Leafs not being done before puck drop. And ultimately, we know that the Leafs are going to be very active. We've been saying on the channel, ad nauseum. At the end of the day, seeing this from Elliotte Friedman saying that is also a very encouraging sign. But you mentioned Brian Rust, and it makes, some sense. And looking back at Robertson, 27 points in 2023, 2024. And then, of course, last year, putting up 22 points in 69 appearances. Had a bit of a step back. He played more under Craig Berube. It ultimately didn't work out. Like Elliotte Friedman says, and like everyone seems to be saying, I think a report, like this, it makes so much sense. A Pittsburgh Penguins, you mentioned Brian Rust. Obviously, it would be interesting to see how a contract actually works, or the trade rather actually works, given his contract and things like that. But knowing that the Leafs aren't done is very, very encouraging. And obviously, for Brian Rust in particular, it makes things a little bit intriguing surrounding a top six player because you could then factor him in The Leafs would probably have to give up a bit more. I mean, obviously, it wouldn't be a Nick Robertson 1-for-1 swap, but it's a framework that Elliotte Friedman has mentioned, not just now, but in the past as well. And you look at who the Penguins have. I don't know if Robertson puts up 30, 35 goals alongside Crosby. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But Russ is playing the first line right wing for the Penguins. If you can figure out a deal, now it won't be Robertson for Russ straight up. However, Russ is a pending UFA, so I don't think it would be a crazy amount. Leafs take on most of the salary, which they can do if they offload Kelly Armstrong and David Kemp. I really like the move, and from the Penguins side of things, to be able to clear more cap, even though of course they they have a lot available anyways.
It makes a lot of sense, right? They free up some cap space, like you said, which I don't think they even need to, but they do that. Obviously, Nick Robertson would come in at 1.825. He can score a ton of goals for them. And Brian Rust coming in at $5 million to the Toronto Maple Leafs makes a lot of sense on the top line. There's a guy that scored 65 points last year. So if he comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs, again, Pittsburgh was not good, right? So if he comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs, he can score 65 to 75 points on your top line. Are you replacing Mitch Marner? No, but we've talked about it so much ad nauseum at this point. You don't need to replace Mitch Marner. You want the team to look a little bit different. And Brian Rust to me is more like and yes, he's a little bit older. I acknowledge all of that, but I think he can help the team right now. But he's more of a Zach Hyman type. He's going to go to the dirty areas. He's going to get you the puck, stuff like that, right? And he can still score. He scored 30 goals last year. And I know he's playing with Sidney Crosby, but if you're playing with top line players like a Matthew Nyes or Austin Matthews, you're going to get some points. You're going to collect some points over the course of the season, right? And maybe he doesn't play with them. Maybe he plays on the second line. I think that's less likely at this point. If they were to acquire Brian Rust, I feel like he would be on the top line. Michelli would be on the second line. And if you have Michelli, playing to his potential with really good players, which I think he will next season, he's going to, have that resurgence and look closer to what he did when the team was in Phoenix. I think you solved a lot of problems there. And I suspect the power play should still look good. So I think that could make a lot of sense. And you only have to make a couple moves. You only have to free up, $6 million. So then you can afford Brian Rust at $5 million. And then you have some flexibility with about $1 million left. Because I think it's really important to go into the season with some flexibility. You never know what happens. So I think that makes a lot of sense for the Leafs. But again, Kyle Dubas, what's he going to want? There's no world that it's, Brian Rust for Nick Robertson straight up. That would never happen. So you're talking draft picks. Maybe it's Dennis Hildeby, which I think I would be inclined to do. I think that you hold on to Akhtiamov. I feel like he's more of the guy, but maybe it's Hildeby, right? Because they need some goaltending help over there in Pittsburgh, and they're trying to build that up through the system as well. So maybe it's that. I still think you do that, but it's probably going to be a bigger trade. They got to get creative with the salary cap a little bit. So to me, this makes more sense than going out and getting a guy that's like, an $8 million player and spending even more assets, because I think you just need another player who has that experience, can score maybe 70 to 80 points on that top line, and you'll be okay.
Yeah, and obviously maybe we see a framework where it's Max Domi and Robertson plus draft picks. You mentioned Hildeby. There's a lot of ways that this could work. You obviously had to make sure salaries work, but Dubas might be hard to work with, or it could be beneficial because he overvalues, or at least values higher than some of us fans do regarding Nick Robertson, Dennis Hildeby, and some of the other guys. But that'll wrap it up. Let us know down below what your thoughts are. A pretty big report here from Elliotte Friedman. The Leafs aren't done. That's what we do know. And also, a move is going to be coming for this team.